Hello and welcome to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie, and today I'm joined by Max Sebti, CEO and co-founder of Score, a next-generation computer vision engine that turns raw video into structured predictive intelligence. What makes Score distinctive is that it runs on the Bittensor network rather than closed big tech stacks, raising important questions that we're going to talk about today about who owns and controls our machine vision systems. Max, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you doing?
Oh, good, Tom. Thanks for having me.
No, brilliant. Thank you. And I wonder, Max, what brings you to this conversation on AI ethics, please?
I think I've got a kind of an interesting background in AI. I've started like a couple of years ago. I mean, several years ago, working for a company that was collecting data, annotating data, as we call it, for centralized AI research companies. Just realize how critical this part of the workflow was, and also then realize that it was actually collecting everyone's data across the internet. So obviously when you start working in this world, you're amazed by all the possibilities, and then you start thinking about all the flaws and all the problems it can create. So I would say I've been working in AI for long enough to now also think about the impact of this technology we're building, if that makes sense. So that's the reason why I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, thank you. And I wonder, has your thinking on AI ethics evolved since you began working in this space? Have you mentioned about seeing all this data? Has it changed for you in that time?
The first thing that really came to my mind when I had this kind of step back and realized what we were doing is that I thought immediately that people, as in everyone around the globe, should be able to own a piece of that new technology. So I would say that my angle, but it's because it's kind of my journey, is more about how we can decentralize AI and make everyone like a co-owner of this technology, rather than talk about security or all the other problems we can face with AI. I'm really focused on how can we make this available and open to everyone, rather than just a very selected number of people.
Yeah, and it leads me on to my next question really well, which is that your platform runs on the Bittensor network, as I've mentioned, rather than
Yeah.
a closed big tech system. How do you think having decentralized AI changes who can access and benefit from that computer vision technology that you provide?
Well, no, that's a very good question. I mean, first of all, because it's decentralized and it's running on Bittensor, and I'm going to I'm going to talk about some hot words or buzzwords, but it's working on chain, right? So, and because it's on chain, and by the way, I'm not trying to talk about crypto at all here. I'm just talking about what blockchain allows people to do. Because it's on chain, it's obviously permissionless, so anyone can contribute data, models, or compute. And I think the biggest advantage of running it this way is you can really unlock talent you'd never hire in a centralized setup, or you can get data that you never got access to in a decentralized setup. So that's, to me, that's the main selling point to kind of begin with and to start your journey within this ecosystem.
And are there any practical trade-offs? So are there things that you have to sacrifice by choosing a decentralized approach over a closed system?
Not really, if I'm honest with you, because there's different technologies you can use to both leverage this kind of decentralized crowd, and also, for instance, make sure that your data is secured. I don't want to jump into too many different technicalities, but there's trusted executed environments, for instance, that you can use, so no one could access your data, but yet you could get access to great models and run your data through those models without putting anything out in the wild. So no, I don't see any. If I'm honest with you, I don't see any big trade-offs. The only thing that I see right now is, because it's on chain and because people have this bad, obviously, experience with crypto. It's kind of the biggest blocker right now. You have to accept the fact that you have to go through the crypto kind of railway to then jump into those decentralized protocols. So that's the biggest issue I see right now. But from a tech perspective and an AI perspective, I think there's nothing better than a decentralized setup.
Well, and I guess leading on from that, so there are a number of people who would probably call themselves skeptics about blockchain and decentralization. How would you respond to those people who might say that decentralization sounds good in theory, but doesn't necessarily work at scale?
I would just say that, on Bittensor, the reason it has reached this kind of escape velocity point is because it's all about incentives. It's game theory at scale. So because everyone is competing against everyone, so there's a very competitive environment. You're incentivized to bring your best models, or your like private data that you wouldn't have brought anywhere else. So you get an advantage, and you get the rewards the system can pay you off. So I think it's just obviously blockchain, crypto, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of obviously bad experiences around this, which I can understand. But if you study Bittensor, it's really well put together, and you don't even have to be a crypto enthusiast to understand that if the incentive mechanism is rightly put together, then there's nothing that could stop you from just providing the best AI tech on the market. And then there's plenty of examples that I can share for you to understand the scale of things that are happening over there.
Yeah, and I mean, please feel free to share some examples if you'd like.
Yeah, no. So you can take anything related to reinforcement learning. For instance, we have two teams on Bittensor. One's called IOTA, the other one is called Templar. They've been, they've been competing against state of the art, AI research labs, and they've been moving way faster than anyone else, and at a fraction of the cost. I mean, they have all the data you want to you can check on their website. Everything's public, everything's open source. And by the way, I think this is like the second biggest selling point. So the first one is because of blockchain, you can get raw talent from everywhere around the globe. The second thing is everything's open source and everything is verifiable. So the world we live in is mainly composed by closed vision AI companies that are going to show you a benchmark, and then it's very hard for you to go through that data set and see if the benchmark's relevant or not. Whereas in my world, in the decentralized world, everyone can verify what you are pushing on online. So you can find examples in reinforcement learning. I mean, at Score, we work in computer vision and competing against the best models on the market. There's other subnets that are doing even just compute, providing GPUs at a fraction of the cost. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of examples. There's 128 different teams working on Bittensor at the moment.
And it's really interesting hearing you talk about that difference between private and kind of publicly owned or democratized spaces, I suppose. And I know previously you've described the choice as own AI or be owned by AI. And I wonder what concerns you the most about, let's just say, computer vision becoming a private black box controlled by just a few companies. Like you've alluded to it, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that, please.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've used this kind of, own AI or be owned by AI kind of, motto just because I think it's just about. So there's two things here, that are very clear to me. First one is you don't want any private entity to own all the data that can allow them to become, just to use like a movie analogy, the Skynet of our world. And it raises, sorry, a lot of different problems because if a closed entity owns all the data that can control people through cameras, for instance, then you don't know who trained their model, what type of data they've been using to train the model. So it raises a lot of different issues, and obviously create a lot of bias. So that's one thing. You don't want AI to be biased because you never know what's going to happen next and how private companies are going to use the models. So that's very important. The second thing is, if you think about work as we know it, as we knew it for the last 150 years, for instance, this is about to change. And the reason I'm saying own AI or be owned by AI is because I think if you combine, and I'm sorry, it's a bit of a sci-fi type of scenario here, but if you combine cheap energy, which we're heading towards to with fusion and AGI, then you reach the point of abundance. And I think people are going to have to find, and as human beings, they're going to have to find a new way of just doing stuff between 9 to 5. And if you don't think about what AI is going to replace, on your date and on a day-to-day basis, then before you know it, you're going to have to work for AI models. You're going to have to go on a website and just proceed with different tasks so you can get your salary paid at the end of the month. And you want to have a boss, you would just have an interface where you're just working for an AI model, so, or an AI agent, as people like to call them now. So I'm just trying to think a bit forward, and I don't see why people shouldn't have an exposure to a potential upside on this technology becoming this real breakthrough we all think about.
And I really like those two kind of different visions you provided of the future, the kind of the cyberpunk where you log in and you're sitting with an AI interface essentially doing work for the day, and almost as well the potential we have for like a solar punk future of this abundance of energy where actually kind of rethink what it means to be human in the age of AI. And I like how you've been able to show the importance of decentralization to be able to support with those and to help ensure that we're not necessarily into a Skynet future. And we do talk about futuring a lot on the module, and we do like threat casting. We speak a lot about that as well. So it's a really interesting set of examples you've brought in. I wonder though, how do you think about the ethical implications when we think about that same set of technology? And you've alluded to it slightly, but when it begins to move from sport into healthcare, insurance claims, and actually monitoring of people, how do you see those ethical implications developing in that space?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and quite of an important question, for me as an individual, because I'm actually building something in computer vision. So we're very cautious about the way we're training models. And I think it also has to come about again, and I'm getting this from my early days in AI. It's all about the data you give to the models, and it's all about the way you set up your weights. Um, and this, I would probably say, this brought me to think about the incentives again, and that's the reason why I'm operating on Bittensor. The reason I'm saying this is my goal with Score is to find the right metric where we know we could bring good computer vision models in an open source way to all the companies in the world, not just how can we build a closed computer vision model so that a few companies in the US could then sell products to the whole market. My bet is if we manage to create this open source piece of code that anyone could add to their stack, by design, it would create something that is actually a bit closer to what we can see as human beings in the real world, with all the different and diverse data points we're collecting through our own eyes, and I don't know, maybe a hospital in India would use our tech because it's open source, and they would just get to the same point as a very wealthy hospital in the US, and we would just de-risk all the bias we could bring with a closed model just by letting people use and train their own small version of it. If that makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense, and I think it really well demonstrates the kind of the benefit of being able to have these things as open source, so that it isn't just your big three in America who are able to use it and as you say, sell to all of us. I wonder though, with that in mind, thinking about potential for this being used by almost everyone around the world, that real democratization with these open source opportunities. Are there any use cases that you've been approached about where you've actually said, no, I'm not sure we should do that, or perhaps we're not ready for that yet?
I think from an ethical perspective, we're trying to work with my co-founders and also people that are around, are what is called a subnet on Bittensor. So it's, problem, let's say. Um, I think some topics like the military, or anything related to defense, is obviously tricky because you never know what your tech is going to be used for, stuff like that. So we're trying to see if we have to bring some limits to the way we can use our tech, but also taking the journey, taking the decentralized journey, uh, kind of teaches you a lot about your own morals, because basically you want to provide good computer vision tech to the whole world. You want to democratize this part of the code. Then how can you not put your own bias, on your tech? So it's fascinating, and it's very hard to set up boundaries because I would definitely not do certain things, but I'm working with thousands of people around the same goal, which is to bring this open source computer vision model to the world. So it's fascinating, and it's something maybe we should talk about a bit longer, maybe on another episode. But it's definitely something we haven't really solved yet.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'd be great to come back and speak about that interrogation of almost what it means to be human. And as you say, the inherent biases we know will be going into systems that are being created. Even if we put all of our best intentions in, we know that there'll be bias in there. Kind of stepping away from that though slightly, you've spoken a lot about the work that you do at Score and how you're using Bittensor. And I wonder, are there any steps you think that other organizations need to take to ensure that their computer vision systems are transparent and accountable in the way that you're talking about with yours, particularly when we think about data governance for camera streams, for instance?
I think we should know as citizens, we should have access to models and their weight. I think it should be a given. And I think the situation right now is, what's happening right now around computer vision is people think that if you give access to the model, you would have to give access to the data. And then because most of the time data is actually highly sensitive, people are like, yeah, you don't need to know anything about the model because we don't want to disclose any of our data, which I understand, but it's an easy answer. It's the easiest answer to give, so you don't have to be accountable for anything. I just think in general, all the citizens, and I get that it's really hard for people to really either take the time to check or even have the technical abilities to check. But I think it should be one of the things governments should think about how and democracies obviously, how can we give transparency on those models, because if I walk down the street, I want to know what type of data is getting collected around. I don't know, my face, the way my attire, the way I'm walking. Am I being profiled as someone working in a weird way? I don't know, but I need to know. I need to know if there's something around the way they're using cameras.
And I think particularly the kind of the internationalized world that we live in, where in the UK, where we have lots of transnational companies who are working within the UK, whether it's elements of Serco or other organizations like that, it is really difficult because you mentioned government specifically, but also we have to think almost into government as well, like on a broader scale, particularly about how do different democracies interact with each other, because not all democracies in themselves are the same. But with that said, I wonder, are there any non-negotiable guardrails that you think should be in place before these types of systems are deployed at scale in society?
Yeah, probably, but again, I think it's more about the data than the models. Because from a model is you set some weights and you just make decisions about what you want to collect, or predict, let's say. But then it's all about how governments, for instance, we can say governments or even like transnational companies, as you said, how are they going to make sure that our data is not being shared? Because I get that with social media companies, we all got used to share our data with marketing agencies. So it was convenient. You can go on Amazon and Amazon would know everything about you. And but we're not just talking about getting the last iPhone delivered to your door. We're talking about your face being shared across thousands of different data centers, so anyone could spot you in a second anywhere in the world. So I think this is where Skynet becomes the easiest kind of analogy to make. We don't want to be controlled. I get that. Some people could argue that even if we don't want to be controlled, we could feel safer knowing that we were able to kind of see and watch and monitor everything. But I think it's a bit, it, it would be annoying to let big corporations or governments to kind of know everything every second just because there's sensors everywhere. So we need to make sure we have some guardrails around that.
And yeah, particularly if we're thinking that a lot of that technology, or at least what's behind it, is black boxed and very difficult for the kind of the average Joe public to understand. You mentioned about the importance of data, and I just want to pick up on that before we move on. So, what does good data governance look like then in practice when you're dealing with constant video streams?
I don't know if we have something as a reference. I know that Europe tried with GDPR, and other zones are trying other type of governance, to create governance frameworks around data. I don't know if there's something that we should lean onto to really bring this to really bring the same thing to AI. So I don't have like a firm answer on how it should look like. What I know is it's almost impossible for any citizen to really have a say on what is going to be put into the ledger, if that makes sense. But at some point, we should be able to query it. I think just a public record where we can query, um, and our data and see what's been collected, and maybe have a way to ask for some of the data to be completely removed would be, at least I think, the very minimal option we should provide to everyone.
The discussion that we have a lot, even in a university context, is that currently our governance systems don't really allow us to respond to changes just broadly in AI. So by the time we get something through a meeting, it might take 6 months to a year, by which point the thing that we wrote about initially has completely changed once again in the AI space. And there's an entirely new model that we then don't understand again. And I've had this discussion on previous episodes about the fact that the structures that we have, the bureaucracy we have, which has a place, hasn't evolved to catch up with what we need to have for or to be able to have the discussions we need around AI and to be able to put those safeguards in place. But I wonder, Max, coming up to the kind of penultimate question, really, how do you think that we can balance the benefits of predictive vision systems with legitimate concerns about surveillance and bias?
Yeah, I think if you think about, for instance, loss prevention, um, we've been talking with a lot of organizations across the US, for instance, and you can think about a computer vision system that would help, prevent. I mean, probably not prevent, but at least reduce the time of intervention around like dramatic events that could happen around, I don't know, schools or stadiums or whatever. So every time it's again, it's a trade-off. So every time you go with a predictive system, you know that someone can use it for obviously bad reasons, but at some point, and this is how we're trying to take our conversations with different organizations across the US, for instance, it could also save some lives. You can think about computer vision in different setups, but I think this one and the use case is also pretty interesting. You know, we're working with some organizations to see if we could have a set of drones around some venues and computer vision systems to really monitor like a very close area around the venue, and if someone crosses a line, someone you're not expected to cross this line. I don't know. If, let's say it's a school, and there's an adult crossing the line, and you weren't expecting this person to do it. Then you would just trigger a drone to kind of be launched and follow and track the person. And by doing this, obviously you're creating a system that can be absolutely worrying, but at the same time maybe that could help people in very dramatic situations. So it's always a trade-off. And as I'm saying, the only reason we can keep doing this at Score is because we know it's open source and it's completely verifiable. So if anyone needs to check anything we're doing, it's completely public.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example you gave made me really think about, and I don't have an answer, but where would that line be between helpful monitoring and then invasive surveillance? And it's a really interesting space, I think, that would move. It would be different depending on the context that you're looking at it in. I guess with that in mind, Max, brings me to my final question that I ask all my guests on the podcast is, what steps do you think that we can take to ensure a positive future with AI, please?
Yeah, that's a very good question too. I think the biggest step, and again, I'm biased here, but I would say let's make sure that we all create, or even if we don't create, that we all push for having access to an open AI, you know, model where actually people can see things, verify things, ask for people to be accountable, and not just completely being viewers and spectators of something that isn't completely unfolding before their eyes. I think yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. We need to find a way to make all the AI companies completely open source, completely public, and I don't see any other ways.
Yeah, and it leads to this idea of AI almost as a public utility in the way that we talk about water and the way that we talk about other things like that as well. Thank you for introducing Score, talking about Bittensor and the benefits of kind of open source AI and really answering that question of why we need to be having these discussions about the type of AI that we're using to ensure this more positive future that we've spoken about. But thank you so much, and look forward to speaking to you again in future, as we mentioned. And yeah, have a lovely rest of the day, and speak to you very soon. Thanks so much.
Bye bye.